I've been changing my own oil for years. It's one way to be sure that the job gets done right. And doing it right includes storing the used oil and taking it to a recycling center for disposal. To tell the truth, it wasn't long ago that I threw waste oil in the trash or dumped it in the sewer. It never occurred to me that a few quarts of oil could contribute to the pollution of our environment. It was a TV program that helped me put our environmental concerns into perspective. Waste disposal problems aren't solely the result of massive spills or the acts of some unscrupulous landfill operators. The fact is, we all generate waste, and our environment is slowly being destroyed by a lot of people like you and me doing 1,000 things that by themselves seem insignificant, but collectively they're causing serious damage. It finally got through to me. Protecting our environment isn't just the responsibility of a few waste haulers and treatment plants. It's everybody's business to see that wastes are properly disposed of or reused. A clean environment means a better life for me and a brighter, more healthful future for my family. The company recognizes that protecting the environment is an important part of our daily job. Throughout our facilities, we're faced with the need to properly dispose of many waste byproducts. Virtually every day, each of us encounters situations involving hazardous waste. That's why we all must do our part to see that waste is correctly handled, from the moment it's generated until its final disposal. Even empty drums containing the residue of a stored material can damage the environment if we don't follow the correct disposal procedures. And some of our own products can become hazardous waste if they're accidentally spilled or leaked and absorbed by the surrounding earth. Virtually every day, each of us encounters situations involving hazardous waste. That's why we all must do our part to see that waste is correctly handled, from the moment it's generated until its final disposal. Recognizing the scope of this hazardous waste problem, the federal government in 1976 enacted the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, commonly known as RCRA. This law and accompanying state and federal regulations has been expanded and strengthened over the years. They put the responsibility for waste management on the shoulders of the generators, industries like ours, that produce the waste materials. These regulations set strict standards for the handling, transportation, storage, treatment, and disposal of hazardous wastes. In general, RCRA requires hazardous waste generators to address the following: personnel training, facility inspections, waste identification and analysis, emergency response planning, security, and record keeping. Let's look at each of these requirements in greater detail. The purpose of the first requirement, training, is to ensure the protection of our environment and to provide for our personal safety. Everyone must be made aware of the specific federal and state regulations governing waste handling, storage, transportation, and disposal procedures. These regulations, along with specific emergency response procedures, will be reviewed with you by your supervisor or environmental specialist. The second RCRA requirement calls for regular facility inspections. Scheduled inspections ensure that waste handling facilities are functioning as intended and that all emergency equipment is in working condition. These inspections make it possible for us to detect deterioration in advance so that we can take the necessary actions to prevent equipment failure. The third requirement of RCRA is perhaps its most important and complex element. It covers waste identification and analysis. Before we can make any decisions regarding the handling of a waste material, we must establish whether it is hazardous. Not all wastes are. Waste materials such as garbage, paper, and some industrial wastes are classified as non-hazardous. To determine if a waste is hazardous, we must answer these questions. Has the waste been listed as hazardous by the Environmental Protection Agency? The EPA has determined that a number of specific wastes are hazardous to human health and the environment. Your facility environmental personnel will check to see if the waste we're dealing with is on this list. If it isn't on the EPA list, then we must answer the question, does the waste have any of the following characteristics? Is it ignitable? Is it reactive? Is it corrosive? Is it toxic? If the waste has any one of these characteristics, or is listed by the EPA, then it must be classified as hazardous and handled in accordance with the procedures established by RCRA. These 4 characteristics are extremely important in identifying and handling a hazardous waste, so we'll discuss each one individually. An ignitable hazardous waste is one that has a flash point below 140 degrees Fahrenheit. These wastes require special handling and disposal methods to prevent unplanned burning. Accidental ignition of waste can cause property loss, injuries, and damage to the environment. Reactive wastes are those that can spontaneously release heat and toxic gases when mixed with other substances. Gases such as hydrogen sulfide or hydrogen cyanide can pose a threat to the environment and to those individuals handling the waste. The other 2 characteristics of a hazardous waste, corrosivity and toxicity, present equally dangerous potential threats to the environment and to our personal health. Corrosive wastes, such as strong acids or caustics, can burn the skin or corrode metal. The determination of corrosivity is dependent on the waste's pH factor. Wastes with a pH factor of less than 2 or more than 12.5 are classified as hazardous wastes. Corrosives, depending on their concentration and the length of exposure, can be extremely hazardous. The final hazardous waste characteristic is toxicity. Toxics are those materials that can cause environmental damage. They may enter the environment as a result of improper waste handling or disposal. Once this contamination occurs, it can be irreversible, and the critical natural balance of wildlife, vegetation, and water is upset. Over time, these toxics can enter our consumable water supply, become a part of our food chain, and cause serious adverse human health effects. To fully satisfy the RCRA identification requirement, there must be a specific analysis of the waste material. This analysis must go beyond the determination that the waste is ignitable, reactive, corrosive, or toxic, and identify the waste's physical chemical makeup. With this information in hand, it becomes possible to make the correct decision concerning safe management of the waste. The 4th RCRA requirement concerns contingency, preparedness, and prevention plans. These plans are required to ensure the safe handling of our wastes under all conditions. They cover the design and installation of storage and handling facilities that are compatible with the properties of our particular waste. The design and installation of monitoring systems to detect any abnormal conditions in the waste flow. Backup systems that will react in the event of an emergency, and a plan to command the human resources needed to deal with these emergencies, such as a vessel leak or fire. The most important element of any preparedness plan is the readiness of the people involved. Each of us must be trained to observe problems and to respond appropriately to unexpected situations. We must conduct advanced planning with outside organizations such as hospitals, fire departments, and law enforcement groups to ensure that they are also prepared to respond to emergencies. These emergency response plans can be obtained from your supervisor. Make sure you're familiar with all of the elements of these plans. The 5th RCRA requirement deals with security. We've probably all heard about instances where a person has unknowingly entered a hazardous waste facility and been exposed to potentially harmful wastes. To prevent this from happening at our hazardous waste facility, we've established strict security measures. These may include roving patrols, security fences, warning signs, adequate lighting, and surveillance cameras. However, the most effective security measure is you. Be alert to situations that can jeopardize the security of our facility and immediately report them to your supervisor. We don't want a visitor or untrained employee inadvertently entering a waste handling facility. The final RCRA requirement covers record keeping. RCRA has been called the cradle-to-grave law because it tracks a hazardous waste from the moment of its generation through its final disposal. Well-organized, up-to-date records document that we've properly handled a waste throughout this cycle. A key element of the record-keeping procedures established by RCRA is the manifest system. This system provides a documentary trail of the movement of hazardous waste as it's transported from the site where it was generated to the treatment or disposal location. Everyone involved in handling the waste must sign the manifest. Copies of the manifest are then kept on file by the generator, transporter, and disposer. Finally, a copy of the manifest signed by all companies involved is promptly returned to the waste generator. It's very important that all information on the manifest be accurate, since it serves as our primary record of the waste's handling after it leaves our site. In addition to the manifest system, we're required to keep records of waste analyses, equipment inspections, and employee training.
For the waste that was shipped out last week.
They document our handling of wastes in a responsible manner. Regulations require that we keep these records on file for at least 3 years. Your supervisor or facility waste coordinator will advise you of specific record retention guidelines. RCRA regulations are very important to all of us, both as individuals and as employees. So let's review the key points we've just discussed. Federal and state regulations put the responsibility for waste management on the shoulders of the generators, industries like ours that produce waste material byproducts. Specifically, RCRA requires generators of hazardous waste to address the following: personnel training, to increase awareness of regulatory requirements for handling hazardous waste; facility inspections, to detect deterioration and to prevent equipment failure; waste identification and analysis, to determine its physical chemical makeup; contingency and preparedness and prevention plans, to ensure the readiness of personnel and equipment in the event of an emergency; security, to prevent unauthorized entry to hazardous wastes; and record keeping, to maintain the integrity of the cradle-to-grave tracking of all hazardous wastes. If you have questions about waste handling procedures, ask your supervisor or environmental specialist. The success of our environmental protection program requires everyone's cooperation. And working together, we can preserve a part of our lives that we all cherish, a clean and healthful environment. If we don't protect it, who will? After all, protecting the environment is everybody's business.